Plywood is the most popular and versatile material in woodworking. Whether you're building cabinets, furniture, or shop projects, knowing how to master this sheet good is a must-have skill. But buying plywood can be a daunting task, and it does come with its own set of challenges. If you get caught making one of these mistakes, it can cost you big time. So today, I'll demystify ply and show you how to avoid those mistakes you're going to face, as well as how to pick the best plywood for your project. So let's say you've never looked at or bought a piece of plywood in your life. I'll go ahead and get you up to speed in, let's say, 30 seconds. Plywood is a composite building material commonly but not exclusively sold in 4-foot by 8-foot sheets. That's 1220 by 2440 millimeters for my imperially challenged friends, and comes in a range of thicknesses. It's made up of different layers or plies arranged in alternating cross-grain patterns. This cross-grain pattern gives plywood its strength and stability. And the whole thing is sandwiched between two laughably thin veneer layers. Plywood usually gets its name based on these veneers, aka oak plywood is just plywood with oak veneers. All right, so now that we're all on the same page, let's get into the details. So there are more types of plywood than you could ever imagine. Let's see. There's paint grade, construction grade, furniture grade,
lemon shrimp, coconut shrimp, pepper shrimp.
As the name suggests, these are all made for different purposes and come at different price points. And for the most part, how you use it and what you pay for it is based largely on its veneer grade. There are 4 standard grades, usually A through D, sometimes 1 through 4, and you'll usually see them paired together like this, and that's because each face or veneer of the plywood gets its own grade. A grade is the best, and it's sometimes called furniture grade, and that's because it can be clear-coated or stained and be the show face of whatever you're building. This face is flawless, very smooth to the touch, free of defects, and seamless in appearance. B and C grade are next, allowing for some minor defects to be visible, and you can also start to see patches or even fillers start to be used to deal with larger defects. And then there's poor D grade, which can be very rough feeling and full of exposed knot holes, splits, and discolorations. So plywood graded as AB is often called cabinet grade ply, and that's because one face is the A or show face, and the other one is the B face, which usually goes on the less visible side of the cabinet. For the most part, your cabinet or furniture grade plywood will be hardwood ply. I would caution anyone against building cabinets or furniture using cheaper plywood like pine because of its low-grade appearance and tendency to be more unstable and warp. And it's not because pine is inherently bad, it's because pine plywood is intentionally manufactured cheaper because its primary use is in construction as sheathing or subfloor, where it's going to get fastened on all 4 sides and then covered up, so stability and appearance aren't things that you need to pay a premium for. That means you'll most likely find these plywoods with CDX or BCX grades. That X on the end stands for exterior rated. The other big factor in choosing plywood is the number and type of plies that it has, and you can break these plies down into 2 groups: the core plies and the veneer plies. The veneer plies are the 2 outer plies that you see. These are often very thin and easy to sand through, which is why most plywood comes pre-sanded and doesn't need much additional sanding to move right on to the finishing stage. And contrary to what the name implies, hardwood ply is only called that because of the hardwood veneers. The core plies can be made out of just about anything. The most common types of materials used for the core plies are dense hardwoods like birch, lighter weight and cheaper hardwoods like poplar, softwoods like fir, or composites like MDF. And the number of plies will also vary. For 3/4 inch plywood, the most common number of plies are 5, 7, and 13. As a general rule, the higher the number of plies, the more stable the plywood's going to be, and the better the mechanical connections it will make. Then there's every woodworker's holy grail, Baltic birch. It has a very high number of plies. This 3/4 inch piece has 13. It also counts the veneer layers, but these layers are very thick compared to most other plywoods. Woodworkers prize Baltic birch for its strength and stability, and that's because each one of these plies is made from solid birch hardwood. It's very dense, has amazing screw holding power, and you can get very clean joinery like box joints and dovetails. Another sought after feature are these clean void-free edges. Those alternating light and dark colors due to the overlapping long grain and end grain layers is a very attractive look on some types of furniture. I personally like using it on drawer boxes, but for the most part, woodworkers tend to use this ply to build their shop jigs or maybe the internal structure of a piece of furniture. While you can find Baltic birch with really high-grade veneers, it's not easy and can be really expensive. Most of what you're going to find here in North America is going to be BB grade. It tends to have these telltale little patches, which is where the manufacturer filled in a defect or a void. And because of that, you can't really apply paint or finish without those showing right through. Another type of plywood you can get is pre-finished plywood, and this is my personal favorite for making cabinets. I tend to get a lot of comments on my videos because most people have never seen it before and big box stores just don't carry it. This plywood is made by the same manufacturers that supply the big box stores, but they offer higher quality veneers and they apply a UV cured coating, so it's often just called UV coated ply. And you may think with better looking veneers and a coating already applied that this would cost way more than what you would get at a big box store, but this costs around $100 per sheet. While this red oak ply with no finish applied at the big box store is $90 per sheet, and it's C-grade veneers. The amount of money and labor saved by not having to buy and apply finish more than makes up for the additional $10 per sheet. And you're also getting a better looking product. And this is why where you buy your plywood is so important. And I can already hear you saying, well, they don't sell that kind of plywood where I live. And while there's a chance that that's true, there's an even greater chance that it's just because no one's ever showed you where to look. Big box stores will always have a very limited supply of mostly undesirable plywood because those places primarily exist to support construction and home maintenance projects. If you want to find the furniture and cabinet grade plywood, you need to find out where the furniture and cabinet makers in your areas buy their materials. And they most likely don't buy their materials online and have it shipped in from far away because lumber and plywood is very big and heavy and very costly to ship. Plywood distributors carry hundreds and hundreds of different types of sheet goods, including Baltic birch and pre-finished ply. And the great thing is these guys deal with plywood all day long. They're very knowledgeable because it's all they do. Unlike,
Hi there. Is there a project you're working on?
I know more than you.
All right.
Lucky for me and you, I've already done a video that gives the secrets of how to find these places. So once you're done with this video, head down to the description where I'm going to link and timestamp the video that's going to help you find what you're looking for. So now that you've got that plywood back at your shop, you've got to go through the not so trivial process of moving that stuff around and cutting it up. And to help with that, here's a quick list of 5 tools that I think are most helpful in that process. The first thing you're going to need to do is move your plywood around effectively, and the best way I found to do this is with one of these sheet good carriers. These slide onto the edge of the plywood and pinch it with these very grippy rubber pads. This makes it much easier to lift the plywood and move it around with just one hand. Now that I have my plywood where I want it, I need a place to cut it. And people typically go one of 2 ways with this. They either Jason Hibbs that thing up onto the table saw like some kind of woodworking cowboy, or they use the good old garage floor, place where sawdust, wolf spiders, and sore knees live. Neither of those options sounds really appealing to me, so I went with option C. I bought a centipede work holder, which is an expandable platform that can be used for all kinds of things really, but one thing I find it most useful for is cutting sheet goods. Somehow this thing is rated for 6,000 pounds, and I have no idea how they tested that, but this guy tested it by lifting his tractor off the ground. And I don't really care if it's true or not, because I know it's more than capable of holding a full sheet of plywood, as well as a full me, which is all I'd ever ask it to do. This thing gives you a stable, portable work surface that requires almost no time to set up. One of my favorite tips is to use a piece of pink foam insulation as a layer between the centipede and the plywood. The foam not only provides a sacrificial layer that you can cut into without worrying about damaging your saw blades, but it also prevents you from cutting the supports. It's like giving your plywood a comfy mattress to lie on while you rip it to pieces. One thing that can be a real issue with cutting plywood is tear out, especially with these paper-thin veneers. Regardless of whether you're making your cuts with a circular saw or a table saw, the best way to prevent this is to use the right saw blade, which is why you should always choose a high tooth count dedicated crosscut blade. Because it's made by alternating layers of wood at right angles, every cut on a piece of plywood is actually a crosscut. These saw blades have special tooth geometries meant to shear the wood almost like a pair of scissors slices through paper. They also make crosscut blades specifically designed for ultra fine finish worthy cuts on sheet goods. But you can also buy yourself a little extra insurance against that chip out by covering the area you plan to cut with green or blue painter's tape. The tape's going to act like an extra layer of veneer to back up the actual veneer when you cut it. This trick does make your workflow a little more time consuming because you're going to have to tape off every single cut that you make, and it's no guarantee of success, especially if you use the wrong kind of saw blade. Once your plywood parts are cut to final size for your project, you need to think about joinery, and the most common and accessible way to join plywood together is with screws. Because of the overlapping layers in plywood, it has excellent screw holding power as long as you're screwing through the face of the ply. But these layers can actually work against you when you try to drive the screw in through the edge. The screw can act like a wedge, separating the layers and splitting the plywood, ruining the joint. The best way to keep this from happening to you is to always drill a pilot hole first. Drilling a pilot hole gives the screw a place to go and relieves that outward pressure that causes the plywood layers to split. Just make sure that the bit is slightly smaller in diameter than the shaft of the screw, and that way the threads are going to have some wood left to bite into. But in most cases, you also want to add a countersink to your pilot hole so that the head of the screw sits below the surface. You could buy a separate countersink to make these, but I recommend getting a bit like this that can create both the pilot hole and the countersink at the same time. Trust me, over the course of an entire project where you might need to drill 100 or more pilot holes, this can really save a ton of time. And these bits also have features like stop collars that don't mar your work and let you set your countersink to a specific depth. This way, every single pilot hole that you drill is going to be very consistent. Another option, which avoids drilling into the edge of the plywood altogether, is to use pocket holes. Instead of driving your screw from the outside at 90 degrees into the edge of the ply, pocket holes are designed to enter through the face of one part and into the face of the adjoining part. This effectively eliminates any chance of splitting that plywood. And as a bonus, if you plan the layout of your pocket holes correctly, they can all be hidden from view and you won't ever know that they're there, unlike screwing into the face like this. Another really good alternative to mechanical fasteners is using dados and rabbets. These are just simple grooves that you cut into the plywood that perfectly fit an adjoining piece of ply. These are great for cabinet construction, and because you're integrating two pieces of wood together, you can get a really strong joint, and all you need is glue and clamps. No fasteners needed.
Straight cut router bits typically come in standard sizes like 3/4 inch and 1/2 inch. The problem is plywood doesn't. It's thinner than that. So if you cut your dado using a 3/4 inch bit, this joint is going to come out super sloppy, and we can't have that. We want everything in nice and snug. The good news is they actually make undersized plywood bits, and they typically come in a set of 3 so that you can handle 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 3/4 inch plywood. Even though it's called a 3/4 inch plywood bit, the actual diameter is 23/32 to match the plywood. So now our joint is going to come together nice and snuggy snug, like we know what we're doing. Yeah, that thing's not going anywhere.
Or you can skip the router altogether and just use a table saw to cut these grooves. Just do yourself a favor and use a ripping blade with flat teeth. That way you'll get nice square bottoms on your dados and not these tiny little bat ears. And unless you have those perfect void-free edges of Baltic birch, you're probably going to want to cover those things up, and the way that you do that is with edge banding. Edge banding comes in a few different forms. You can buy iron-on edge banding, which is simple to apply and comes in a wide variety of species to match your project. While it's very quick to apply this kind of edge banding, it's not always very durable. This stuff is really thin, just like the veneer on your plywood, and with heavy use, this can begin to pull up the edge banding, which is going to require a repair. Another option is to create your own edge banding out of solid wood that matches the species of your plywood veneer. This does take more work to mill your edge banding down to size, but the advantage is you can make it as thick as you like, anywhere from 1/8 of an inch all the way up to 3/4 of an inch thick. This will make the edge banding a lot more resistant to damage, but you do have to apply it with glue, which can cause squeeze out, and that needs to be cleaned up, and you're going to have to wait for that glue to cure before you can continue on with your project. These band clamps are a great way to hold your edge banding in place while the glue dries and avoid having to put pin nail holes in your workpiece. But you can also do this with blue or green painter's tape, which is what I do all the time. This is a cheap and easy way to accomplish the same task. And one tip here that will get you a really nice and professional look is to oversize your edge banding on both sides, just making it a little bit thicker than the plywood. Then once the glue is cured, you can go back with a router and a flush trim bit and cut that edge banding perfectly even with the edge of the plywood. Well, that's all I know about plywood. I hope that you learned something new and you're at least a little more confident next time that you need to grab some plywood for a project. Thanks for watching. Peace.